analysts. Well, I don't even know where to start. I don't know where to start. But we just played a select few of those clips, and I actually think you do have to play them from time to time just to remind people this isn't normal. He comes out and he's talking about 29,000 Chinese soldiers and cell phones and soft, doughy judge. I don't know what you make of this, but he's not a normal person.
Right. Well, so the question is there selective amnesia when it comes to Trump? Are we truly the United States of amnesia, as Gore Vidal used to say? And to some extent, if you believe these polls, there is a certain amount of amnesia. And so I was actually glad that they covered some of that press conference the next day, the day after the guilty verdict. But it was interesting, and so many of the lies were so blatant. I mean, the idea that there's an army of Chinese soldiers coming from Mexico. I mean, I don't even know how that would work.
Right.
So I do think it is important to unpack the lies, but, you have to real-time fact-check him, because otherwise this information just goes on, and his supporters repeat it. What I think is interesting is they have been desperately trying to spin this verdict in all different ways. They say it helps him. And then you have the Speaker, the United States Speaker of the House, right? Number two to the presidency, saying that the Supreme Court should come in and overrule this verdict. There's no mechanism for that, but it shows that they are really panicked and troubled.
Jen, this is the problem, that if one is a low information voter, you can understand how we've seen so many examples of repetition. People will say things that they hear them say. But we're not talking about low information people. As Molly said, we're talking about the Speaker of the House. We're talking about that red tie brigade of politicians. We're talking about everybody who wants to be his vice president. Very senior people, some very powerful, some very influential, who are parroting exactly the same lines about how this is a banana republic and this was a witch hunt and this was a political prosecution.
Well, let me first say that I think it's malpractice for the journalistic troops not to begin asking questions about Trump's sanity, his mental and emotional status. He sounds nuts. Now, maybe he's just an angry person, but listen, he didn't sound this nuts. He didn't sound this disjointed 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or even a year ago. He is mentally and emotionally unwinding. And the fact that the press doesn't cover him for any period of time where the average person can watch for a minute or two and see this, or they don't raise those issues, is, I think, inexcusable. Now, as for these other people, like Congressman Johnson, this is reprehensible. They are, in essence, attacking a judge and a jury with no basis whatsoever. They are seeking to undermine, delegitimize the entire justice system, because that's what fascists do. They undermine the rule of law. They undermine any source of power, any source of independent information that could block their leader from taking power. And so when he does this, when the Marco Rubios, when all the troops that go on Fox News say it's rigged, it's corrupt, it's a kangaroo court, they're really assaulting and insulting average Americans, those 12 people who sat on that jury, who, as you point out, are now being threatened, who are now probably living in fear of their lives for some period of time. And for a judge who, by all accounts, was extremely measured, he could have, for example, thrown Trump in jail for contempt. He withheld that. There were many motions that he didn't go with the prosecution. He went with the defense. So this attack is not simply evidence, I think, of the cult, but it's of something even more deeper and more pernicious, and that's the attack on the entire concept of the rule of law. We've had this triumph. A former president had to sit in court, had to put himself at the mercy of the jury, and was found guilty. That's what the rule of law is all about. And it's magnificent because, in fact, he got treated probably better, but at least no worse than anyone else. And that, I think, is the lesson that we should take from it. And we should be very wary and very suspicious of people who want to tear that down.
We've just heard from Stormy Daniels, who thinks that the consequence of this conviction should be that Donald Trump should be sentenced to jail and should be caused to perform community service. Of course, he'll come out very quickly and say that everything he does is a community service. But, Molly, you did write in a piece for MSNBC with respect to this. Now that we have a verdict in the case, there's a good chance Trump will play it as being what he expected or even wanted. And just this morning on Fox News, he said he'll be okay with the possibility of house arrest or jail time. So he's doing what he does. He's spinning this as, I'm good with that. In fact, I think he's trying to convey, Barbara Rez and I were talking this morning, that he's strong. He's a tough guy. He can go to jail. He's not Nelson Mandela or Gandhi or Martin Luther King.
But his allies tried to shop this idea that he was like Nelson Mandela, which is insane. Look, what's good is that there are 3 Republicans, Asa Hutchinson, Larry Hogan, John Bolton, who have come out and said this is the rule of law and we need to respect it. 3 out of hundreds, but at least a few have said that this is what we need to do and this is how our American justice system works. And that is important. But yes, I mean, he's going to spin this. Look, we know what Trump does because he's been doing absolutely the same thing for 8 years.
But Jen, one thing that's interesting about it is that he does turn the volume up, right? When you think there's no more shock to be had, he then says something more shocking. And it's like that presser that we were showing you that he did on Friday morning. I mean, he just brings up outrageous things that we don't know how to make sense. So on one hand, I don't want to be one of those people who says ignore Donald Trump, because you can't, because he might be the next president of the United States. On the other hand, how do you deal with the fact that he now starts talking about 29,000 Chinese soldiers with the best cell phones who are taking over our country? How do you have reasonable conversations around why it is dangerous? Because just this week, we've seen a couple more rich billionaires say that they're backing Donald Trump.
I would like every newspaper and every outlet in the mainstream media to employ 2 people. One, an expert on fascism, and second, a psychiatrist or psychologist, because those people have experience in dealing with these people. And that's how we should look upon him. First of all, as someone who's mentally and emotionally unbalanced. And secondly, someone who aspires to be a strong man, like Putin, like Mussolini, like Castro. All of these people have the same trademark signs. They have these enormously long, rambling speeches. They threaten, they bluster, they identify an outsider that is a threat to them. And this is both a personal sign of his degeneration and also a sign that he realizes this is it. If he doesn't win and tie down and tore down this entire system of justice, he personally is washed up. And of course, his party is in deep trouble. So this air of desperation, I think you're exactly right, it gets worse and worse and worse as the water is circling the drain, is a telltale sign. And listen, we now do have some polling. I'm not a big fan of polling as a predictive measure, but at least it's reflecting what people think currently, and almost half of independents think he should drop out. That's pretty significant. This is not evidence that it's improving him. When people like Mitt Romney, God bless him, where he came from this, I don't know, who says he's stronger now than he was before. Good God, that's ridiculous. Just common sense would tell you that. And listen, what was the one word that probably people who are those disengaged voters heard a lot of on Thursday and Friday? Guilty. Convicted, felon. And that's what's important. He's not stronger than God. He's a loser. He's a convict. He may go to jail. That's weakness. That's injury. He's not going to be able to defend the rest of America. He can't defend himself. And that's the message I think the Democrats and the Biden campaign team has to get out.
Go ahead, Bob.
What you want is a truth sandwich. You want to debunk the lie.
Yep.
Say the lie. So you say, no, there's not an army of Chinese soldiers coming through Mexico. Then use the Trump quote in the middle. And then you can talk about the historical or autocratic, trope that's being used. But you have to be so careful in the mainstream media. And again, our tech companies have no regulation, so they just do whatever they want. But, the more we can link to real sources, to real news, the more we can try to debunk the lie. And that's this idea of a truth sandwich, which was popularized by Margaret Sullivan, and I think is really important.
We're going to have to provide all that context so that you can't take it out of context. It has to be done. Thanks to both of you, as always. Molly Jong-Fast, special correspondent for Vanity Fair, and Jennifer Rubin, opinion writer for The Washington Post and author of Resistance: How Women Saved Democracy from Donald Trump. Both women are MSNBC political analysts.